jump in?
What about the expectations today, the economic expectations, and the role that you think that plays in the current politics, or I guess the way that the expectations have evolved over time since 2009?
I give you one example that I know a little bit, or at least read a bit about it, is the expectations that Mr. Ahmadinejad's administration created in case of housing. They had a project called Tarh Maskan. Maskan Mehr. According to the governor of the Central Bank of Iran today, it accounts for 40% of the increase in liquidity which has taken place. And basically, the administration had promised a house to everybody. But these houses have to be built, these houses have to be financed, these houses have to be with people moving into them had to pay the mortgages. It was the Iranian version of the housing affordable that George Bush promised in the United States. You cannot push people beyond their means, forcing them into a new economic situation that they cannot afford. And there are so many houses that you can build that people can earn money to pay the mortgages on. Now, in America, the figure may be 4 million or 5 million. In Iran, may be a different figure, which I am not familiar with. So here is the expectation that, no, you deserve a house, but you can't afford it. So we buy it, we build it for you, and we force the banks to borrow from the central bank, to lend it to you, and you cannot afford to pay back the banks. So the banks now end up with 30% or 40% on non-performing assets. And they owe so much to the central bank. These are all additional liquidity on the top of the oil money. And then you end up with 40% inflation. And how much grows? Minus 5.6. Minus 5.6.
Now, Dina.
Okay, back to the question of industrialization. Like some of the articles mentioned that industrialization needs lots of technicians that were missing.
Yeah.
So for you to produce technicians, you need like to create an urban class, and like you need to urbanize the country, and all this needs lots of government spending. So like the population can be like urbanized and educated and all that. So how can you like go in a path of industrialization without having lots of government spending to create the conditions for industrialization? And when the government spends, then the inflation rises. So I'm just wondering how this like contradiction in industrialization and developing countries could have been resolved. So the problem is too much spending by the government. So.
We set up in Iran a plan organization just to answer that and to get that right. And you're quite right. I mean, if it's the government to do it, it's not the market mechanism to do it, then the government has to provide the coordination between all different components of this jigsaw puzzle. Namely, you have to train people first before you set up the industry. If you set up the industry without the training, then you have to bring some people from outside. And it goes on that who are you going to train these people? You have to have universities to do them. You have to have technical colleges to do them. They have to have teachers. And so you have different departments, as we used to have what we call mudiriyat in Sazman Barname, dealing with all these and then putting them all together. And often you get things out of line. I mean, you cannot perfectly match everything. The question is a matter of degree. And the question is that, again, when you come back to the oil economy, it's the government who is supposed to be doing it. Because all this extra work is only because of the oil money, which is on the table. Otherwise, you would have gone, if you leave it to the market mechanism, you can leave it to the globalized world economy. You may find Iran's, without oil, its comparative advantage may lie elsewhere. It may not necessarily have to industrialize. You know what I mean? The choice of industrialization becomes a real choice on the table because of the oil money. Hence, it's the government. How do we coordinate different segments? We miss it out from here or there, but as it showed, in the 60s, again, we had it right. In the 70s, we didn't have it right because of the massive reliance on foreign workers, which showed that our labor, our skilled labor, was very much in short supply, given the expansion.
Mary?
I have a question. I guess I'm just curious for any insights you may have concerning the subject. You have talked a great deal about, especially about the role of oil in Iran's economy. But I wonder about your thoughts about, in general, about this movement of money, because on page 280 of the article of Walton, he talks about Shah, his family, and the close business associates having a detrimental role on the economy. And in particular, he mentions this creation of the banks. Of course, this manufacturing also going on, but the creation of the banks, hotels, insurance, and also the changes to trade and banking regulations, and this easy access to private sector deposits. And also even the central bank's loans and credits. It made me wonder, because there was a book I have read by Kashavarzian, where he talks about the state and bazaar in Iran, and he mentions that during the Shah's time, in fact, that the bazaar had such a major role in loaning money amongst its members and also to the general public. And in his analysis, he seems to suggest that the banks, the proper banks themselves, actually didn't really have they didn't really have much of a relationship with many in the general public in Iran. And I just wonder what you might have to say about that issue. And also, I'm thinking as well, this mention of the failure of the real estate in Tehran. Also, it is mentioned in Walton's article. Which happened, I think, because investors anticipated that Americans would be renting the apartments. It's, to me, such a, there's the theory about rentier state of Iran. Real estate is so important as a way of capitalizing on one's investment of money. And even when I went to the stock market a few years ago, I talked with some people there, and I asked them, well, if I was going to invest money, what would be the best investment? One man said to me, well, pharmaceuticals or cement was his other item he mentioned. So, and then also it makes me wonder, also the mention in the same article under discussion about the capital flight in 74 and 75. So it seemed that already, like this is even before the revolution happened, something is happening amongst some of the sort of more wealthy members of society. So,
if I may say, I counted 5 questions.
I am so sorry. I'm thinking kind of various, but if you could answer one of them.
Layers.
Excuse me.
The first part was that reference Bolton makes to the Shah's presence in the Iranian economy through his Pahlavi Foundation. But that's a fact. There's also a bank called Bank Umran, which was owned by Pahlavi Foundation. But in terms of percentage of the total economy, I cannot put a figure on it, but I can assure you it's not a major presence. What he's really alluding to, as you quite rightly said, is the second point, that there was also corruption, and that the royal family were party to many deals. Again, I have no evidence to support or to reject it, but clearly there's a lot of reference to that in the literature, but I cannot add anything to that you already know, because I have no inside knowledge of these. The third part, which is, I think, quite relevant, at least I can say something about it, is the question of the banking system in the economy. The industrialization policy of Iran is a fact of life. It's true, and Walton mentions it also, but not as much as it should have, perhaps. We, and where Mrs. Zaidi worked, we had 3 key industrial, what we call specialized banks on the industrial side, and we also have one for the agricultural sector. In that IMDBI, where Mrs. Zaidi was a prominent member, he was this bank in itself, and the Credit Bank of Iran, Industrial Credit Bank of Iran, which was initially owned by the Plan Organization, They were instruments of government promotion of industry. The same manner as tariff policy was to protect the domestic industry. Industrial loans to be paid to specific projects at a going rate, at that time say it was 8% or whatever, was part of this package of getting a new industry going in Iran. We also had, at my time, about 27 commercial banks. Only one of them was owned by the bank. But the major players in Iran's economy in terms of banking was Bank Milli, which was also government-owned, or Bank Sepah, it's government-owned, I mean, owned by the pension funds of the army, which comes to the same thing in practice. Bank Saderat, very large, with the largest bank of Iran in terms of, as a private bank, the largest in terms of branches, over 3,000. It was owned by very small shareholders with no dominant shareholder until the last year of the bank, which is a different story. I've written about it in my book. But these banks dealt with at commercial levels to all their clients, and they had a widespread network to deal with them. It is also true even today, almost every part of the Middle East. You can talk about the interest rate policy as a matter of issue. And one of your fourth question, by the way, about capital flights is about the exchange rate policy. I'll be happy to elaborate on those, but there are different sets of policies. In the interest rate policy, you can argue that interest rates, if it is to be, let me rephrase that. There are three prices especially in the oil-producing countries, most importantly, that you have to get them right. And it's also true of other countries, but not maybe to the same extent. One is the price of money, that's interest rate. One is the price of foreign exchange, that's the exchange rate. And one is the price of energy. If you get these three basic prices right, and we can talk about what is right in a minute, then a lot of things follow correctly. If you get them wrong, if they are out of line with whatever we are going to describe in a minute, then everything else will be miscalculated and misdistributed. Now, first about the interest rate. They say interest rate should be positive in real terms. Why? Because you're foregoing, as you know in your Economics 101, you're foregoing the pleasure of consuming something now for later. That there's a price on this. And that price has to be time sensitive. Okay? Therefore, what does it mean though in practice? In today's Iran, at 40% realized CPI inflation, you're talking about 40 plus something. So we're talking about 42% inflation, something like that. Where the curb money and the curb market comes in, which you were alluding to in Iran, i.e. the bazaris, is that when the interest rate is administered, either artificially or administratively, by the central bank or by the government or whoever, therefore it creates a rent. That's one of the definitions of a rentier state. Whoever has access to that cheap money can command extra profits out of it. And people who could not have access to borrow from the Industrial and Mining Development Bank of Iran at, say, 8%, or they could not have access because they were not creditworthy. There are different criteria here. From a commercial bank like Bank Milli, then those who could would borrow at 10 or 8 or 12 and lend at 30. And a number of them could be merchants. And that's how you get a curb market. And you have it even in Iran today. Now, the capital flight was a combination of when you maintain the exchange rate, keep it stable, but you allow the inflation to go up. And meanwhile, you're liberalizing your capital account. So You have 40% inflation in Iran today. You maintain the exchange rate, but they used to, at 1,200 to man. And if you allow the capital to go out, then every foreign good becomes very attractive. Every foreign property, including foreign real estate, becomes very attractive. And that's more or less what happened in the 70s in Iran. Capital liberalization account, by the way, it was before my time, it preceded it because that had become the fashion of the day. That with so much money, with oil income coming in, why are you controlling exchange rate? Why are you controlling the capital flight or capital flow out of the country? You should be a net lender to the rest of the world. It made sense. That's the language of the IMF. But now they have recently, my old establishment has revisited this issue, and now they're issuing new guidelines. They think it's in fact quite respectable in economic jargon and policy to have capital control, to the extent that it will allow you to support your industry, if you like. In Iran of 1974, in line with the increase in the price of oil, we had two exchange markets in Iran. And we were commercial and non-commercial. And with the intention that we could differentiate the two in terms of prices. Soon we discovered you can't do that. Because if there is a differential in price and the non-commercial goes up, then people you create that rent again, that you want to go to the first one to buy the exchange and then to sell it in the next one. Therefore, the central bank had to intervene to bring the price down to the same level in both markets. But effectively what it meant was that, yes, an Iranian could go to a commercial bank and buy as much dollars or send it overseas as he wanted to. Now, why did he do that? Because they said, well, recently I was in south of France. You can buy a 2-bedroom apartment there for half or third the price of in Tehran, if you can find it in Tehran. This is the Dutch disease, as you know. The Dutch disease is when, in fact, the non-tradable goods in the economy, it starts going up as a result of this injection of money. And clearly, it's protected by definition. The real estate in Tehran is protected. Nobody can bring in an apartment from overseas there. So